Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Givin Liz the Biz. Please welcome from Ohio, Congressman Jim Jordan, and your host, CPAC Chairman Matt Schlapp.
How's everyone doing? I can't believe how fast the first day is gone. It just went like that. What did you think about that certain leader of a foreign country that spoke earlier? Did you like that speech? Yeah, I figured that was pretty popular. Jim Jordan, you've done something in Congress that like no one has really ever done. You've achieved these important positions. And at the same time, you have like 100% rating on our scorecard. Like no one really ever does it that way. Is it hard to always do the right thing?
I don't know how that happens, but I'm glad it does. You guys, you give me that nice plaque every year, and I appreciate it. I just try to do what I said I was going to do, fight for the things that I think are worth fighting for, and try to stay true to the message of those values and principles that make our country the great place that it is. In spite of Joe Biden, in spite of the left, I always say, you know, the left controls big media, the left controls big tech, the left controls big corporations, the left now controls big sports, the left controls Hollywood, the left controls higher education, the left controls the White House, the left controls the Senate, they control the House, but they don't control we the people.
That's right.
And so you try to focus on that, and somehow it works out, and we do okay with the CPAC scorecard.
So we got a big election coming up. I don't know if you know that. I'm kind of being sarcastic because I think you're probably very in demand on the campaign trail. You're going everywhere. We picked up 15 seats. By the way, I just want to say this. It's really pretty much impossible to pick up 15 seats in the House and lose the White House. I just want to say that. I just don't think, it doesn't really work. When incumbent presidents go on to lose, they also lose seats, right?
Typically.
In these legislative chambers. But you kind of did most of the work last cycle by picking up all those seats, and you all deserve credit. I remember telling everybody, I'm like, I'm looking at Donald Trump's strength. We're going to pick up seats in the House. You couldn't find anybody in the swamp that they were like, no, we're going to lose a couple seats. You were a believer then. We don't have that many seats to go to get the majority. What's the #1 priority for Jim Jordan in a House majority?
Well, to do a couple things. One, do what we said. So we need to pass the legislation that's consistent with what we campaigned on. We need to.
But it'll stop, right? It'll pass the House, and then there won't be enough senators, and of course Biden would veto it if there were.
On the border, on big tech, on energy, we need to pass that legislation. If it gets to the Senate, he'll veto it. But we also then need to do the investigations in a way that's consistent with the Constitution. I mean, this is real important. The left, the Democrats, they went after President Trump for, well, they're still going after him, for goodness sake. They've never stopped going after him. But they do it just for purely politics because they don't want President Trump disrupting the swamp like he did when he was president. We got to do it in a way that's consistent with the Constitution. But we need to do it because the American people deserve the truth. They need to know, for example, did this virus really start in a lab? I'm convinced it did. We need to get the facts about that and make sure the country understands it. We need to know about the political nature of the Department of Justice. I mean, think about this. Last week, Senator Grassley has a whistleblower come to his office. The whistleblower says that they suppressed evidence of the Hunter Biden story, suppressed evidence that showed it wasn't disinformation. They suppressed that evidence. The person that the whistleblower said was key to that was this individual named Timothy Tebow at the Justice Department. At the same time, we got whistleblowers coming to our office who tell us that they're getting pressured to categorize and catalog every case they do as a domestic extremism, violent extremism case, when in fact they're not. And the same person doing the primary pressuring is this individual, Timothy Tebow. That all needs to be investigated. And when you couple it with what they've done to parents who show up at school board meetings, the political nature of our Justice Department is frightening. And so that's something, if we get the majority, we need to look at, and a host of other issues, the border situation, as I mentioned. We need to look at how did thousands of Americans' tax returns get public? That's not supposed to happen in this great country. So all those things need to be investigated just so you have the truth. Plus, that will help frame up the 2024 race when I hope and I think President Trump is going to run again, and we need to make sure that he wins.
Okay, so it's not unprecedented, but it's nearly unprecedented that the Department of Justice is working hand in glove with this J6 illegitimate committee on the House, and they're going after people like Steve Bannon, who's here on the grounds of CPAC, and others for not following these subpoenas, right? When you get, which is just a travesty, but when you have that gavel, and you're the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives, and you guys vote on a subpoena, doesn't that put Merrick Garland in a little bit of a box? He's basically saying, if you ignore a congressional subpoena, I will go after you through the Department of Justice. You really think he's going to be consistent and do the same thing for you?
Well, there's been a double standard for a long time, it seems to me. But before I get into that, let me just say one thing. There is an election in 12 days in the state of Wyoming, and there is a good person, Harriet Hagman, running for office. If you all haven't helped her, I mean, we want to make sure that she wins that race.
By the way, CPAC has endorsed Harriet. We have sent checks to Harriet through our PAC. And boy, having another person who pushed for impeachment against Donald Trump go down would be sweet.
Yeah, to this committee, though, I think the key point is we've caught this committee lying 8 different times. I mean, they lied about Bernie Kerrick's travels. They lied about Barry Loudermilk, a colleague of mine, giving a tour of the Capitol. They lied about Jenna Ellis's documents. They lied about Eric Hirschman writing the note. They lied about the Secret Service. We caught him lying about Pat Cipollone and corroborating the story about if they went to the White House, they'd be charged. He said he didn't say that. And then they lied about me twice. I forwarded a text message to the White House Chief of Staff, and they said that it came from me when I forwarded from a lawyer in town who was former Inspector General for Don Rumsfeld. And then they played a video clip of me. I was doing an interview, and they played a video clip. In the video clip, I said, January 6th is the ultimate date of significance in a presidential contest because it's the last step. You got the election, then the Electoral College meets, and their certification, and then the last step is Congress certifying the electors. And they left out an important part of that clip, because before I said January 6th is the most important date in a presidential contest. Before I said the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said January 6th is the ultimate date of significance. That sort of changes the context. So think about this. If we've caught him in 8 false statements without any access to the documents, without any ability to do the deposition, be in the deposition, see the transcripts, look at the evidence, if we've caught him in that many lies with that limited knowledge, imagine how many other false things they're telling the country. That is what is so wrong. There's a great scripture verse. Polly and I found this the other day. Proverbs 18:17, it says, the first to present his case seems right until another questions him. And it's like, that's the principle of cross-examination that we always have in any type of proceeding, any type of hearing, that unfortunately is not present with this January 6th committee.
The Bible also talks about bearing false witness, which is awfully important, because if you have no truth, what do you have in government, right? And so back to this question of what do? You say there's an election in Wyoming. We still have to have a big red wave in November, but how are you thinking through this awesome responsibility you have? I think the investigations piece is the biggest piece. It's what you immediately jump to it. We have always had a philosophy under the previous 2 Republican speakers of, we should be careful. We don't want to do too much. We'll take baby steps. We'll do one thing at a time. And I remember people like John Dingell and Henry Waxman just flooding all their political opponents with a constant barrage of letters and inquiries. What is going to be Jim Jordan's approach?
We're going to, like I said, we're going to do it in the right way, in a way that's consistent with the Constitution. But you got to be aggressive if you're going to get to the truth. Back up a second. Think about what they did, what the Justice Department did to moms and dads. So I always tell it this way. On September 29th, the National School Board Association, left-wing political group, writes a letter to the Biden White House saying, use the Patriot Act against parents. 5 days later, October 4th, the Attorney General of the United States issues a memorandum which does exactly what the left-wing political organization asked him to do 5 days prior. He issues that memorandum, says set up a dedicated line of threat communication, a snitch line, basically for reporting on parents who show up at school board meetings to advocate for the well-being of their child. 16 days after that, October 20th, the FBI sends out an email to agents all across the country, and that email says, use this threat tag designation, this EDU official, this designation, this threat tag, use that when you're investigating parents who've been reported on the snitch line that the memorandum was set up by the Attorney General. So think about it. September 29th, October 4th is the memorandum to U.S. attorneys. October 20th is the email to FBI agents. All that happens in 22 days. The first question you ask yourself is, when have you ever seen the federal government move that fast, right? It never happens. But when it came to going after their political opponents, their political opposition, they moved at lightning speed. And we've since learned that prior to that initial letter on September 29th, the Biden White House and the Justice Department were already talking to the school board. The letter was simply the pretext. Now we got the excuse to do what we want to do, which is to go after our political opponents. That is not supposed to happen in our government, but unfortunately it is. And we have now had, Matt, we've had over a dozen whistleblowers come to our office, FBI agents coming to our office as whistleblowers. And understand, we're in the minority. There's not a whole lot we can do other than tell their story.
But they feel desperate.
Yeah. They're good agents, good rank-and-file agents doing the Lord's work, and they're sick of the political nature of the Justice Department, so they're coming to us so we can begin to tell their story. If we get the majority, we can do the subpoenas and get further information and make sure the country gets the truth and hopefully stop it.
The one thing Republicans believe in is cutting staffs, not spending a lot of money on bureaucracy, but I really think when it comes to your committee in a new majority, you really got to have these killer lawyers, and you've really got to staff up. And I think one of your first challenges is to convince, the fellow members of your majority that this committee is going to need a lot of resources. And the second thing is you have all these subcommittees, but I don't know how you're going to choose between Fauci and vaccines, big tech censorship, not following voting election laws and not following voter ID. There's the laptop from hell. There is a lot of other corruption in this administration. There is an open southern border. I think the problem is there's a lot on your shoulders to try to adjudicate this, but it's going to be a big, big effort because you got to do it. You got to get all this done. And
we are talking as a conference, as a Republican conference, if in fact we win the majority, how we will do that, because it's not all going to go through.
So you got to spread it out a little bit.
Yeah, Oversight Committee, Ways and Means Committee, Armed Services Committee has to look at the exit, the debacle that was the exit from Afghanistan.
Could you kind of be in charge of the other chairman?
You're kind, but we do have a broad jurisdiction in Judiciary Committee. We'll look at a lot of this. There's currently a select committee on the coronavirus. In fact, in that committee 6 weeks ago, I asked Dr. Birx was a witness. Now think about this. She was a witness.
She's the one with the scarf.
Yeah, scarf lady. And I asked her a question. I asked her a simple first question, direct question. I said, Dr. Birx, when the Biden administration told us that the vaccinated couldn't get the virus, were they guessing or lying? And her response was amazing. She says, I don't know. And I said, so you're telling me that our government could have been lying to we the people? And she goes, well, I like to think they were hopeful. And I'm like, so it was a guess, a lie, or a hope? That's not how the government, you think about this whole, we had this at Homeland Security, they were going to set up the Disinformation Governance Board. And I tell folks all the time.
I think they did set it up, but then they had to shut it down.
Because we all talked about it. You guys talked about it. They shut it down, thank goodness. But the fact that they were doing it, it kind of begs the obvious question, who's the biggest purveyor of disinformation? It's the federal government, right? It's like the government. How many things have they told us? So that's scary when they want to tell us what's disinformation, when in fact they have. I always do the virus. Remember when Biden said he had a plan, right?
Yeah.
Right? Biden said he would never impose a vaccine mandate, and then he did. So much so the Supreme Court had to tell him it was unconstitutional. They told us that this didn't come from a lab, it wasn't gain-of-function research, and it wasn't our tax dollars. Well, it sure looks like all those things are true. I mean, think about the origins. They said, no, it didn't come from a lab. It was a bat to a pangolin to a hippopotamus to Joe Rogan, and then we all got.
And then when you said it online,
it's crazy. Yeah.
When you said it online, they'd shut you down.
Yeah.
They'd flag your
They would call you
account.
for they would say you're disinformation. They told us that the vaccinated couldn't get it, the vaccinated couldn't transmit it. They said it was first no mask, then one mask, then two masks, then one mask, then no mask, then two masks. I mean, it's like, which is it?
Where do you have to put your mask for this monkeypox thing? I'm a little worried about this.
I don't know. Yeah. Matt said that, not me.
Sorry, I digress.
Yeah. I mean, the point is, we all knew the virus was serious, but be honest with us. And then don't turn around and say that the people are having disinformation when, in fact, it's the government who's proven time and time again they were.
Okay, so what you're telling us is that you guys are plotting and planning. You know the big job you have ahead of you. You know investigations are the number one thing. Let's talk about what I think is the number two thing. Senate Republicans have really done a number on House speakers because Senate Republicans are not willing to stand up and fight on spending questions. So you always have this first budget vehicle that goes through, and it's a wrecking ball for House speakers because they try to negotiate with Senate Republicans and come up with something. Can we break this historic problem?
I hope so.
And can House Republicans tell Senate Republicans, look, we're going to pick one big thing and maybe one or two little things like defund NPR. That'd be a nice one. Defund PBS. That'd be a nice one. Little things, but a big thing. And I think you have a theory on this. What is that big thing that we ought to get around and say we're not going to give in on this one?
The entire Republican conference will have to make a decision on that. I think it's probably either the border, because we all know that the chaos that now is our southern, but we no longer have a border, and frankly, that is intentional. The Biden administration is intentionally doing that. So
and that's no longer a Republican issue. It's affecting all these communities.
Sure is. We talked about this earlier. We are a populist, because of President Trump, thank goodness, we are now a populist party rooted in conservative principle, which is frankly where we always should have been. So it's either the border or it's energy. Because energy when the price of energy goes up, that drives the price of everything else. It's why main reason why we got this 41-year high inflation rate. So one of those two areas, we have to pick that policy and say, okay, Senate, if you're going to spend at this level, we're going to pass a good budget in the House, good appropriations at the House down here in light of where we should be with the debt situation we have. It's going to go to the Senate, and Schumer and Biden are going to say, well, no, we got to spend up here on all kinds of crazy things. And we're going to say, okay, if you want any kind of spending level up there, then we got to get a good policy that actually does something good for the country on immigration, on our border security, I should say, or on energy. And I think that'll be a conference decision we have to. But you have to, our fiscal year ends September 30th. You can't wait till September 20th and start having a debate. You've got to have a national debate for weeks and weeks and months so that the country fully understands what's at stake and why it's appropriate to do this policy before we actually pass the appropriation bill.
Well, it just seems to me that if that's our big thing that we have to decide. Look, this is like for all of us, for the conservative activists around the country, you know, we have to be realistic. This is the first step towards regaining power, a big red wave in November. That doesn't get much accomplished unless we follow it 2 years later with an even bigger red wave. In that period of time, that year or so, less than a year, when that presidential race is coming about, we have to determine what we will fight like hell for in that first budget process. That could be fossil fuels. That could be building a pipeline at Keystone XL. That could be securing the border. That could be, you know, these major questions on elections. I still don't know if Kari Lake has been declared the winner out in Arizona. It kind of makes me nervous. Has she been declared the winner? Please tell me she has been. But that's not good. So I just feel like that's what we have to get ourselves around. You brought up President Trump. You believe he's running. You've been saying that consistently throughout this whole period of time. I know what he thinks of you. I know what he thinks of you as a wrestler, first of all, because he admires you as a fierce athlete, but I know what he thinks of you as a human being, and he appreciates the fact that you have stood up against all these lies against him, and we appreciate the fact so much that you speak for all of us when you do that. He's going to be on this stage on Saturday, and he might even be watching you right now, but he always has a speech, but then he kind of goes off the script, right?
Which is always a great part.
Isn't that the best part?
Oh, I love that part.
I
like his whole speech.
Why is everyone telling him to stay on the script? I like the off-road vehicle version of Trump. I don't know.
I do too. I like his energy, his charisma. I love the fact that he loves the country. He loves our law enforcement, loves our veterans, our military. Most importantly, you know this, Matt, because we've had the privilege to spend a lot of time around him. I'm sure many of you have as well. He loves the American people.
He does love
what makes our country special. And the one thing he does, and it's genuine, it's real, and you all know it, when he speaks, he always lets the audience know, and the audience always understands this, that he's fighting for them.
Yeah.
And he said this is a great line, and it's so true. He says, the reason they come after me so hard is because I'm fighting for you. Yeah. And that is exactly the truth, and it's why he was such an effective president and why I want him to run again.
So the final question here, Donald Trump decides to run for president. He's out there across the country. What do you think the number one thing he's learned after spending the time on the presidential campaign, 4 years in the White House, these constant attacks? What's different about him today than when he came down that escalator in 2015?
The experience he had in that first term, I think he's going to be ready to go on day one. Not that they weren't before, but it was,
Let's be honest, they weren't.
Well, he knew that the swamp was intense, that the bureaucracy,
He was ready, but it was too tough to take it all on at once.
Well, and it's hard. Think about it. He got more done than any president in our lifetime, maybe in history, and he did it with every Democrat against him, everyone in the mainstream press against him, half the Republicans and all the bureaucracy against him, and in spite of that, got more accomplished than any president we've ever seen. So I think he knows what he's up against, and the fact that they've been going after him since he first ran, before he was even president, with what they did with the Trump-Russia collusion baloney. They started spying on his campaign before he was even elected, and they're continuing to go after him with the January 6th committee. So he understands how intense this is, and frankly, he said this. He doesn't have to do it. He's got a wonderful life with a wonderful family, but he does it because he loves this nation, the greatest country ever, and he's willing to go back and fight for it again.
Jim Jordan, thanks for being with us again.
God
bless you. Keep up the fight.
Thank you. Thank you. We go this way.